camp century saw the beginning of an entirely new branch of science, using samples of ancient ice to reconstruct the climate of the past. The Greenland ice sheet is made up by year after year of snowfall. As snow falls, it captures a record of the conditions in the atmosphere, which then gets preserved in the layers of ice. So many traces from the past are buried in the ice. There's ash from big volcanic eruptions like Krakatoa. Dust from Ice Age dust storms as far away as Mongolia. And even traces of lead from smelting during the Roman Empire. It's all blown in by the wind, carried down by the snow, and buried down there. Even more importantly, as snow falls, it captures an indirect record of the temperature at the time it was falling. And the ice preserves this temperature information. So scientists drill down to retrieve long cylinders of ancient ice known as ice cores. Now they could use these ice cores to create a record of past temperatures. In effect, they could travel back in time. And in the mid-1980s, they began to realise that the old idea that climate always changed slowly couldn't be more wrong. It's been said that these ice cores are like having a weather station in Greenland for the last 100,000 years. And by chemically analysing the ice, it's possible to reconstruct the climate, counting back through tens of thousands of years. In the early 1980s, most scientists believed, as this graph shows, that the climate changed only very slowly and gradually through the Ice Age and up to the present warm period. But the ice cores told a completely different story. The climate seemed to be jumping all over the place, from warm to cold and back again. What the ice revealed was hard to believe. In the past 100,000 years, there had been literally dozens of these incredibly large changes. What's more, the changes didn't happen gradually. In most cases, they occurred in just a few short years. We might wake up one day to find that global warming had triggered a sudden massive shift in climate, like the ones revealed in the ice cores. But in the 1980s, this idea was still controversial. Many scientists, not just skeptics, argued that the theory of rapid climate change was still unproven. Aerosols owed their existence to one of the unluckiest men in scientific history. Thomas Midgley invented CFCs, the gases that were used in aerosols and in fridges. Before that, he'd come up with the idea of putting lead in petrol. The trouble was, CFCs had a terrible secret. They appeared to be good news, inert, safe, cheap to manufacture, but when they floated up to the top of the atmosphere, they turned into something deadly. They destroyed a vital gas that protects us all from lethal solar rays. They destroyed ozone. In 1984, British scientists working in Antarctica discovered that the ozone layer that protects the planet had a huge hole in it.
Studies from space show that the hole, in blue and pink, is growing year by year, and last year spanned the whole Antarctic continent. The culprit is most probably chloro or fluorocarbons used in aerosols and fridges.
Faced with the rapidly growing health risks, the world acted. Midgley's CFCs were banned, at about the same time that his other great invention, lead in petrol, was also being banned. The hole in the ozone layer proved beyond doubt that humans were capable of causing catastrophic damage to very significant parts of the atmosphere, and in a very short space of time. Another part of the skeptic's case, the idea that the atmosphere was simply too vast for us to have any serious effect on it, had crumbled. And in the 1980s, there was one final ugly fact that challenged the skeptic's view that climate change was nothing to worry about.
The heat wave broke 88 high-temperature records across the nation since Sunday.
Hot town, summer in the city.
New York City was one of 12 cities that suffered and sweltered in record-high temperatures.
Temperatures in some places went as high as 109 degrees.
Through the 1980s, the temperature of the planet kept rising, building on the warming that had first begun in the 1970s.
The 80s have brought us the 4 hottest years in the last 100.
At least 60 cities reported
Almost every year broke records.
Temperatures in the 90s, even in the hundreds.
The question for scientists was whether this was just a natural variation or whether it was due to man-made emissions of carbon dioxide, the greenhouse effect. In 1988, one man, top NASA scientist Jim Hansen, decided he knew the answer. And he wanted the whole world to hear what he had to say. His chosen forum was an American congressional inquiry.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. Dr. Hansen, if you'd start us off, we'd appreciate it.
I would like to draw 3 main conclusions. Number 1, the Earth is warmer in 1988 than at any time in the history of instrumental measurements. And number 3, our computer climate simulations indicate that the greenhouse effect is already large enough to begin to affect the probability of extreme events such as summer heat waves. Altogether, this evidence represents a very strong case, in my opinion, that the greenhouse effect has been detected and it is changing our climate now.
It was pretty explosive stuff. Essentially what Hansen was saying is that global warming was no longer a prediction, it was now an observation. For the first time, a leading scientist had stepped off the fence and told the world global warming had arrived.
All of us must begin to face up to the fact that if we continue emitting vast quantities of the greenhouse gases, we're going to face a global temperature rise larger than anything experienced in human history.
Hansen succeeded. Thanks to him, global warming became an overnight sensation.
The time for action to respond to the impending warming is now.
Hansen later admitted that he'd weighed up the risk of being wrong against the costs of saying nothing and decided that he had to speak out.
This evidence represents a very strong case.
Most scientists would rather not make a definitive statement, but the public doesn't always understand that. I mean, if you say on the one hand this and on the other hand that, it makes the public think, well, we don't know enough to draw a conclusion.
Within a few months of Hansen's evidence, the United Nations had helped set up an international committee to examine global warming, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. In a way, Jim Hansen had been too successful. His high-profile testimony galvanised all those who, for whatever reason, disagreed with taking action to prevent climate change.
Simply, this is not one of them. It's just not true.
It was the beginning of an organised fight back, driven by a band of maverick scientists.
Global warming is not a crisis.
Supported by powerful businesses and politicians. And they would subject the whole idea of global warming to a new and searching critique.